The natural wonders of the karst world are truly a sight to behold. The Postojna cave is probably one of the most renowned karst caves in the world, and undeniably the main Slovene tourist attraction, known to millions of people worldwide. The Seknica polje and lake are among the most famous karst poljes in the world. The intermittent lake, home to various birds, is an ornithologist's paradise. The Škocjan caves and Plitvice lakes are included on the UNESCO World Heritage Site list due to their uniqueness. The karst region covers almost half of Slovenia and Croatia. Most of it is a part of the so-called Dinaric karst that stretches from Slovenia's Ljubljana to Albania. Most of the territory of the western part of the Slovene and Croatian border is also karst. Karst is characterized by a lack of surface waters, sparse soil, as well as broken, bare, rocky terrain. Due to these characteristics, karst can be a difficult landscape to live on. Karst covers only 7 to 12% of the Earth's surface. Despite this, it supplies drinking water to almost a quarter of the world's population. In Slovenia and Croatia, karst springs provide drinking water to almost half of the inhabitants. The development of karst relies on precipitation, which is enriched with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and in the soil it infiltrates to form a weak carbonic acid that dissolves carbonate rocks. The infiltration of precipitation is rapid due to the thin soil cover and high permeability. Precipitation diffuses through the crevices and fissures on the rocky surface into the underground. Watercourses that collect water in non-karst areas also sink in the karst underground through open conduits and caves. Contact karst occurs at the geological boundary between carbonate and non-carbonate rocks. An example is Podgrajsko Podolje, northeast of Slavnik on the Croatian border. The rivers that flow into the contact karst from non-karstic rocks create characteristic landforms such as blind valleys, sinkholes and ponor caves. A blind valley is a river valley with a continuous watercourse that becomes wider on limestone covered with a layer of less permeable deposits. The valley abruptly ends with a steep semicircular headwall where the watercourse sinks into a vertical shaft. Two typical examples of blind valleys are Brezovica and Odolina in Podgrajsko Podolje. Rivers that disappear through ponors flow deep into the unknown underground. In some places, the subterranean portions of these watercourses can be accessed through caves that are connected to the surface. The water which sinks into karst near Slivje can be seen in the Dimnica cave. Underground, waters may converge into larger conduits and passages and flow towards karst springs. The waters of sinking streams in Podgrajsko Podolje flow underground towards the Rijana spring and the Croatian springs in Croatia. Contact karst has developed on the Slovene and Croatian border of North Istria. Numerous small rivers have formed blind valleys, where the rivers sink into ponors and caves. The most picturesque ponor is Butori, where a small stream flows into a collapsed dough line in a waterfall and then disappears underground through a shaft. The areas of carbonate rocks containing sufficient void spaces for infiltration and storage of water are called karst aquifers. The water there occupies void spaces of different shapes and sizes. The pores between the rock grains, fissures and karst conduits form favorable conditions for a generally rapid flow of water underground. Different parts of the aquifers can be identified based on the characteristics of water flow and water storage. In the upper part, termed the unsaturated and vadose zone, the quick vertical stream flow in the main drainage conduits and the slow percolation through the fissured matrix intertwine. This dry part of the aquifer, where the pores are only occasionally filled with water, can be hundreds of meters thick. The lower part is called the saturated or phreatic zone. This zone is filled with water. The stream flow here is subhorizontal in the channels, fissures and porous base matrix in the direction of the springs. The area between the vadose and phreatic zones is called the floodwater or epiphreatic zone. In high water stages, the void spaces in this zone are filled with water. In low water stages, they remain dry. The water level in the epiphreatic zone fluctuates constantly. It is most affected by the amount of surface water recharge from the surface. Fluctuations in stream flow and the storage of water underground are typical for karst. The volume and velocity of water moving through karst is much higher in comparison to non-karst aquifers and can reach hundreds of meters per hour. Different hydrological conditions can cause the velocity and direction of the underground stream flow to change, so that certain parts of the aquifer contribute water to different springs. The karst aquifer drains through numerous karst springs. These springs are of vital importance to a great number of inhabitants, since they are their most important source of drinking water. The presence of man on karst is strongly connected to the natural resources there. The karst surface is rocky, very diverse and unsuitable for cultivation due to its thin soil cover. There is usually no water on the karst surface either, as most of it flows underground immediately. For these reasons, the karst has never been densely populated. The people who persevered there lived modestly and worked hard to survive. In the past, settlement was closely linked to water resources such as sinkhole ponds, active caves and karst springs. If there were no springs, people used precipitation collectors to obtain water. Over time, larger urban settlements developed alongside traffic routes. Such developments now pose a threat to the karst landscape and even more to the water in the karst aquifers. Every karst spring has a recharge area. This can include karst and non-karst areas from where surface and underground waters flow towards the spring. The areas delimited by water flows towards different springs and river basins are known as watersheds. A unique characteristic of karst is that water from a certain area can flow toward different springs at different times. The recharge areas of different springs may thus overlap. Tap water in the southwestern part of Slovenia, in Istria and northern Kvarner, most likely comes from one of the larger karst springs. Two of the largest karst springs are the Rijana spring and the Sveti Ivan spring near Buzet. The Rijana Springs recharge area covers an area of about 247 square kilometers. It has supplied drinking water to the Slovene littoral since 1935. The amount of water from the Rijana spring is generally sufficient for the needs of about 80,000 inhabitants. But under dry conditions during the summer tourist season, there can be a water shortage. The Rijana water plant was built in 1997. It uses an ultrafiltration system for water purification in its plant in Tsepki. The Sveti Ivan spring near Buzet was first used for the Istrian regional water system in 1933. The water from the spring is filtered and chlorinated. The amount of water pumped is up to 300 litres per second, but less than 110 litres per second during summer droughts. Water from the Bulash spring near Istarske Toplice compensates for this deficiency. Karst aquifers are highly vulnerable to the consequences of pollution due to their unique characteristics. As water moves through the underground, it can carry with it pollutants from the surface. In a non-karst aquifer, the diffuse pollution slowly penetrates through the pores between the soil particles, allowing some pollutants to decompose before they reach the water source. Potential pollution spreads in karst aquifers. For karst, the extremely quick permeation of fluids into the underground is typical. The decomposition and retention of pollutants are low due to the thin soil layer and sparse vegetation. When the pollutants enter the aquifer, their velocity through karst conduits can be very high, sometimes exceeding 100 meters per hour. For this reason, the pollutants can reach the spring in high concentrations. Remoteness from the water spring does not necessarily mean greater protection against pollution. The most common sources of pollutants of karst waters are household, municipal and industrial wastewaters, contaminated road and parking lot runoff, and leachates from unauthorized dumping, as well as from inadequately built landfills. The quality of karst water is also threatened by farming, where inappropriate use and overuse of pesticides and poorly controlled manure facilities are common. Construction activities also threaten underground karst waters, since the overburden, the only protective layer of an aquifer, is often removed. Accidental spills of harmful substances also pose a significant danger to karst waters. Karst springs are thus extremely susceptible to pollution and must be appropriately and carefully managed. The basis for proper karst protection is a good understanding of karst aquifer characteristics and functions. Due to various types of groundwater flow, the conditions for the passage of pollutants into karst underground waters are extremely hard to predict. When, how much and for how long the pollution of a spring will occur if its recharge area becomes polluted can only be successfully predicted if one knows the hydrogeological and geological characteristics of the affected area. Pollution remediation in a karst region is very difficult and only possible in exceptional cases. If remediation is to be effective, it is especially important to understand the transport rate and potential flow paths through a karst aquifer. Due to the diverse structure of karst aquifers, classic hydrogeological and geological methods are no substitute for comprehensive research using the most up-to-date methods. The basic research approach in many studies is monitoring the physical and chemical parameters of spring water. More recently, numerous studies have been conducted by thoroughly analysing selected chemical parameters. First, scientists conduct a field study in which they sample spring water or water in accessible caves at carefully chosen intervals according to hydrological conditions. The analyses are then carried out in labs. A precondition for proper protection requires being well acquainted with karst water characteristics. A decree on the water protection area must be based on prior scientific findings to ensure the best possible protection and pollution prevention measures. The recharge area of a spring is divided into water protection zones with different degrees of protection based on vulnerability. Within each zone, permitted, limited and prohibited activities are determined. The highest levels of protection are assigned to the most vulnerable karst areas, where pollution could have catastrophic consequences. Considerable research has confirmed that underground karst water flows are not influenced or delimited by political borders. The protection of transboundary aquifers is more effective when activities are coordinated on both sides of the border. Intergovernmental cooperation between Slovenia and Croatia is essential for the health and welfare of the inhabitants on both sides of the border. Cooperation in the research of transboundary aquifers and the determination of protection measures is necessary. Intergovernmental cooperation in raising the awareness of karst and karst water resources is also very important. People are a part of the continuous water cycle as well as the guardians of this exceptional natural resource. It is of vital importance that we realize that we can destroy it or preserve it for many generations to come.